The Brenke Group LLC, doing business as the Lawtog, provides an online legal portal to help customers identify business and legal problems commonly encountered by individuals in the photography industry. The information discussed in this podcast is meant for educational and entertainment purposes only. Do not confuse this with direct legal advice. The Lawtog is not a law firm and does not and will not perform services performed by an attorney. The Lawtog is not a substitute for direct legal advice from an attorney. What's up? I'm Justin, and welcome to the Talking Pixels podcast, helping you take your photography from hobby to a career. It's no secret that starting a business can be scary and daunting, but today's guest runs a company whose goal is to make that a little easier on photographers. Some of you may have seen her blog posts, ads, and online resources, but today I'm excited to welcome photographer, MBA, attorney, and owner of the Lawtog, Rachel Brenke. Hi, Rachel. How's it going? Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
It's wonderful. This is one of my favorite things to do. And so thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was getting a little tongue-tied there because there's just so many little things to go after your name, but it's amazing because it's like you've had so many careers, it seems like, all, and then found a way to bundle them all into a business itself. So that's super cool. But it's absolutely a treat to have you on today's podcast because I'm sure you've mentored hundreds, if not thousands, of photographers on all things business. And as I mentioned previously, that the goal of this podcast is to help turn photography into a career. So without further ado, are you ready to jump into the episode?
Yeah, let's do this.
All right, cool. So I did a little digging on you leading up to this episode because I wanted to make sure that I had my facts straight. And just in the recording, I found out that I didn't even have them all straight. So maybe for everybody listening who may not be super familiar with, your background and where you kind of come from, how you've built up to having the Lawtog and all your other businesses as well. Maybe just give us a little intro into who you are and how you got to where you're at.
Yes, so I'm Rachel Brenke. I am the head attorney and photographer and owner of the Lawtog, the go-to legal resource for photographers. I didn't start there. I had a couple online apparel stores while I was in undergrad, getting my MBA, became a photographer, really fell in love with photography, still ended up, the whole societal norms, must go to law school, must get a 9-to-5 type of pressure, and went to law school. And by the end of it, I came out with the Lawtog. I love photography. I love creatives. I love the law. And so I just combined it all. And there's a great need. And especially in an industry where not only do we have contracts and liability and intellectual property, but we're selling intellectual property. And if you're a specific type of wedding photographer, you have enhanced liability. And so it's really complex and a lot of fun. And I really enjoy it. So a lot of my time now is doing a lot of things like this. And then also working and representing photographers in many copyright infringement cases because we find our images used everywhere all the time.
Yeah, I mean, that's so important. And I think, the longer you do this, the more you run into seeing those issues occur and realizing how apparent it really is in the industry and how often, I've been doing this, I've been taking photos, I should say now, for like 10 years. And I've probably had 3 or 4 instances of people stealing my images for different uses. And it's been a lot to learn about because there's no one, maybe outside of you, there's not a whole lot of people who are teaching the legal side of photography and understanding, what copyright is and how to protect their intellectual property. And so it's super important, but it's such a thing that's not talked about. So that was part of the reason why I was so excited to have you on today, because it's such an important topic in photography itself. But I also wanted to say, I was just, after reading your bio on your website and stuff, you are literally a superhuman, it sounds like, because the amount of things that you've accomplished in your career is incredible. And, spanning back from, having cancer and then, competing in athletics at a national level and raising a family of 5. It is really, really incredible how you managed to do all of that. And then on top of that, build successful businesses and help other people build successful businesses as well. So I must commend you for all that.
Thank you. Justin, what's interesting as you were talking, I was just thinking about all the people that I've worked with and that I've seen in the industry is that they do a lot of the same things. As entrepreneurs, we're excited. And even if you got into photography and you're just dabbling in it, or you can think back to when you first got in, you may have not thought you had the entrepreneur mindset. You may have not thought that you had this multi-passionate type of mindset or interest, but maybe you've seen it by now. And I feel like there's so many that do this. And I think the biggest thing, you say I'm superhuman. Really, honestly, I am probably not any more skilled than the next person. I've just shown up consistently and intentionally and really committed to my businesses. And, going back to when I was doing photography full time during law school, now it's part time with everything else going on, but full time in law school, I understood how stressful it could be to know that you had to financially help support your family, and you had to jump 2 feet in trying to figure out how to do things, whether it's the photography side, the business side, the marketing and legal. And that's really where the Lawtog came from, because I've been there. I've had the pain points. I still have the pain points. I'm in the trenches. I know what questions clients are going to ask. So I'm here. I'm in the trenches with y'all. I'm not some superhuman, but I do appreciate the compliment.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. But I mean, since you kind of touched on it there a little bit, you know, obviously the Lawtog came to be out of your interest in photography and being an attorney, and then just kind of combining those together. But maybe what kind of services exactly does the Lawtog offer, and where would they find, listeners find that online to be, find out more about it?
Oh, yeah, we're everywhere. So the lawtog.com is kind of the mothership. That's the website that we have blog posts, contract template forms, educational courses, free webinars, free guides, you name it. We also have a large Facebook community of like 75,000-ish members, as well as podcasts and all the big social networks, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. Just trying to really get the information out there, because even when I came into this, even when I was in law school, I didn't know what I didn't know. And so that's really was like that mind-blowing revelation that there's probably many other photographers that don't understand all the inner workings either of intellectual property and contracts and all of that. And so that's what we really try to bring to the table at the Lawtog, is we think about the top pain points that you guys are having and try to roll out as much information as we can, but also be there to be a support. I also have a law firm separately from the Lawtog, where we do a lot of the copyright infringement cases and contract drafting and such for photographers. But yeah, so I mean, the gamut of running a business, we have resources for you, or else we can help you find someone to help you.
Yeah, wow. I mean, that's really incredible just what a resource to have as a photographer. And, I'm certainly going to be paying a little bit more attention to that stuff and looking into some of the services you guys offer, because like I said, I've run into it a couple times now. I've learned some lessons along the way as to what to do and what not to do in those situations. But I'm a firm believer in, like, there's always more you can learn, and this is one of those things that it doesn't hurt to know as much as you possibly can about it, even if you're not a lawyer, because it's just important to know what your rights are and what your ownership is of your images. But I do kind of want to touch it back a little bit here and kind of go into, what I was saying before. Like, you obviously you've already rattled off like multiple of the businesses that you kind of are running and overseeing right now. So it is really incredible and inspiring, I think, to see as a photographer, seeing you do all these other things as well, because I know how much time I can get sucked into doing photography. And obviously now it sounds like you've kind of transitioned into focusing your energy to other things before photography. But at the same time, I have to imagine that you've run into a number of hardships while running these businesses. I mean, I can't imagine it's been smooth sailing building up multiple businesses and at the same time at that. So, maybe would you mind talking to, like, I don't know if there's any that specifically come to mind, but maybe how you've coped with that and how you have kind of built what word am I looking for here? I guess how you've kind of dealt with those hardships, and especially balancing it out with a family and trying to make the most of a bad situation.
Yeah, I think one of the things to keep in mind as entrepreneurs, we are the captain of this ship. So we can choose where we're sailing, what path we're going to take, what equipment that we're going to use, what tools we're going to have, all the navigational, whatever metaphor like you want to use. We are in control of everything. But I think what happens is we get distracted. We start looking around because, like we mentioned before, we kind of have like that passionate burning, and maybe you're having to financially provide, or you just simply want the validation. You want to see a return on your photography because you work so hard. No matter what it is, we start getting distracted from the core things you need to do. And, as an MBA, I also have business consulting that I do with photographers and non-photographers. And I'm always saying the phrase, simplify down to scale up. Like, can equate this to, you'll hear in like Facebook groups, riches are in the niches. You got to niche down, which is true, but it's all really about simplifying. So simplifying who you're talking to, the processes you're going to use, the offerings that you're going to have, and your message. Really, if you stick to that structure and that guidance, that will help you through every business making decision that you're going to have, every opportunity that comes up. Let's take this podcast, for example. Those 4 points that I just talked about. When we got connected, we ran through those. Okay, does that podcast talk to who we're trying to reach? Is it in the niche? Am I one that, is this going to provide a benefit in some way? And yes, it's going to provide a benefit to the industry, which is part of the Lawtog mission. And obviously in the end, hopefully come as a return to me, whether by increase in brand value or some financial return, but that's not the be all and end all, of course. But as you can see, by looking through the lens of these points, you can then make better decisions in your business. And we do this for all of our businesses. What are the decision making? And actually, it's funny, we were talking pre-show, is that I have a team now. When you're starting out, you don't always get to, you're wearing all the hats, juggling all the balls, doing all the things. But now I have a team. By having this structure that I implemented for myself, because I'm one of those, I get an opportunity, I'm like, yeah, I need to take it, even if it may not have a return for me, and that can lead to burnout. But I took that structure and I was also able to hand it off easily to other people to be able to do the inner workings and the scheduling and the coordination of this so that I could have more time to actually be able to show up like here for the podcast. This can be related over to photographers easily. And you know what I love where we're at in the industry now is that when I first started out, we didn't have all these CRMs and systems and auto send contracts and payments. You had to cobble together like PayPal with a redirect to like a form, and like it was a whole hot mess thing. Now we have so many systems and resources and education available. But the other side of that, it is super overwhelming. So just going back to those 4 points, like what's going to serve you and make it so that you can have more time to show up in your business. Now, when I say show up, that can mean a variety of things. Maybe you're a photographer who wants to photograph all the things, right? You want to be the sole photographer. Well, in order to be able to have all the time to do that, you're going to need to come up and putting systems and processes and or delegations in place in order to get to grow that. The other side of it is I've seen people who get into photography but love the business side more. You are the captain of the ship. You could work it so that you're only doing 25% of the shooting, have someone else do the other 75% so you can focus on the business. You can slice and dice this any way. And I hope I'm not overwhelming those that are listening that are first new in business. My bottom line encouragement is simplify down all that you're doing and then really decide what it is that you want out of your photography business or any business. If you're a non-photography business owner listening, because really the only way to grow is in marketing and recognition and brand value, and also to keep your sanity is simplicity in all the things that you do.
Yeah, that's actually, as soon as you said that, it clicked for me. I'm like, man, it is so easy with photography, I think, specifically, to just overwhelm yourself in all of the things. Because like you said, starting out, most photographers are the one-man band, right? They're doing everything. They're doing the marketing, they're doing the shooting, the editing, like all the way down, accounting. And it gets to be a lot to keep track of. And I think very easily you lose sight of your goals. And I'm even like self-reflecting as you were talking on like some of that stuff for myself, and maybe where I was last year and how I was perceiving things is a little different than this year because, well, I mean, let's be honest, the whole last year has been a whirlwind of a year. So it's not been exactly, yeah, it's not been exactly easy to cope with. And I'm sure you've, with the Lawtog, have faced a lot of questions over the past year, which I actually do want to get into later. But yeah, I mean, I think it can be very overwhelming. And then just to simplify back to where your focuses are, what where you should be aligning your energy and how to make your business more effective is valuable feedback. I mean, it's a good way to look at things.
The one thing you just said, the one-man band, you really are. So let's kind of give an example of what I would recommend there. You're sitting here, you're listening to this podcast, you're like, but I can't afford to delegate. All the money that comes in just has to support me, support my family, whatever your situation looks like. You could simplify down. Let's take marketing efforts, for example. Instead of trying to be on all the platforms, get really good at one. because it's going to be what needs to be where your audience, your potential clients are going to be, but you need to get really good at one. And Instagram is once that came out for photographers, y'all, that is a perfect way to put our work on display. Dive in and dig deep, because one of the things that I see, and it's not just photographers, it's entrepreneurs across the board. It's myself too. I was actually even having my own self-reflection this moment about this exact topic this morning, is it's really easy that when you see an algorithm change, like maybe you've been dedicated to Instagram, it to all of a sudden like panic pivot. Oh no, I need to start grabbing YouTube, or I need to start grabbing Facebook or Pinterest. Get really good, because you're simplifying down your avenues. Get really good at one, get the ball rolling, and it'll be easier for you to add on other things. I like to mentally, especially with marketing, I like to visualize it. I might be dating myself a little bit, but like Indiana Jones has like the big boulder that chases him, right, in one of the movies. Imagine that whatever task it is, marketing specifically here, is that task that you're trying to get going. It's really hard to push it and get it going in the beginning, but you're only focused on one boulder, one action, and once it gets going, it just rolls and rolls and rolls because inertia keeps it going for you. And so that honestly is the only way that I've been able to build all these different businesses, is being very purposeful, like with the structure we talked about before, but just capitalizing on one thing. Like when I first started out, I only was focused on Facebook. And I understand that the timing's a little different because we didn't have as many social media, but even still, I have to scale myself in and say, focus just on one or two areas, not trying to do all the things. It doesn't mean you can't entertain like Clubhouse or what else is
Pinterest,
TikTok, all
TikTok,
of
yeah.
that. But you could dabble your toes in it because it could surprise you. But I wouldn't take like all your efforts from Instagram that were 100% and all of a sudden be putting 90% on TikTok unless you're actually seeing an actual return. So that's just a way to kind of simplify it so that you really can grow where you're investing your time.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great tip, because and that was something that I learned. I actually went to school and I studied social media for a certificate program. And at the time, I was very focused on trying to build everything up. And it was very difficult it almost felt like that became my job, was to then just focus on all these social media platforms. Now, they have come out with ways where you can plan and schedule way ahead and make it sit a little bit easier. But still, when I decided to sit down and focus in on Instagram, it became that much more easier to grow a following and, develop and start attracting clients, because I was putting my energy into one thing, and that became my go-to marketing source. With weddings is my primary shooting thing now. I've switched over to Facebook a little bit, and I've had good success there too. But it's taking those things one at a time and really learning the nitty gritty of each of them and how to be effective on those platforms versus trying to do everything at once and not really understanding what it is you're doing or why it is you're doing it.
Well, it's interesting. Something you said that I really liked in there is that we need to make sure that we're putting our efforts, don't just arbitrarily pick a social media platform. You need to find out where is the person that you're trying to serve going to be. Like you said, You've been trying Facebook because of weddings. That you got to go where the people are,
Yep.
and you can't just arbitrarily pick it. So you have to kind of run through that structure we talked about earlier, even if you hate it. Okay, well, let me backtrack. If you hate it, you're not going to show up very well. But I mean,
True.
even if you're not a fan of it, lean into it, because I think for me, if there's a level of frustration, but I'm seeing a return, that frustration starts to come down as the return is going up. And so I start to embrace, like, I really wasn't a fan of Instagram in the beginning, but I recognize the benefits. I know my people are there. I'm still, some days I'm just like, ugh. But the more that I see a return from it, my frustration, and as my skill set goes up in it, the frustration goes down. I mean, if you just absolutely hate it all the time, delegate it or just nix it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, and something social media wise that for maybe some of the people who are older that may be listening and are like, I don't understand Facebook, I don't understand Instagram, I don't want to do that stuff. There's high school kids out there who know them very well and that will do things or, post for you for a very low dollar amount. So if you don't even want to do it, delegation is a very easy thing to do when it comes to social media, at least.
I love that you said that. I was eating lunch before I got on here and I was watching a sitcom, and the premise is that the gal is coming back into the workforce later. She's older. She's trying to be young and hip. But a line really caught me off guard. It said, I bet you that 45-year-old manager has a college student in her office tweeting for her. And I was like, mind blown. Like, don't struggle if you can't do it. And I'm not picking on 45-year-olds. I'm almost there. But like, if you are really trying to reach a certain market and you don't know the lingo and you maybe just don't have the time,
Yeah.
especially as a one-man photographer, you don't have the time to learn it, then hire someone, again, like you said, very low cost. There's, especially now after pandemic and people are embracing the work from home environment more and the flexibility, we have the tools, and having an online footprint is so important. I would definitely make that a to-do. If you're just like, I absolutely hate social media, well, guess what? You need to be there because that's where the people are.
Yeah, and if you're into senior photography or something like that, and TikTok's super big with Gen Z right now, and you're like, I have no interest in getting on and dancing in front of a bunch of people, which I would recommend not doing as a photographer. But there's easily you can find a student out there who may be interested in doing that and finding creative ways to market your photography out there too. So yeah, I mean, I definitely would say look into that. One of the old studios I looked for would hire high school students and basically have them come in 2 days a week. They plan out all the social media posts for the week, and it was taken care of, and it was super easy to do. So definitely something to look into there. But Rachel, I wanted to ask you, because I know that you're also, on top of being a lawyer, you're a business coach, a mentor, like you mentioned, too, outside of photography, even to other businesses. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of mistakes being made by entrepreneurs who are just starting out and they're trying to figure out like, hey, how do I do this business thing? I want to run my own business, but I have no clue where to start. So when it comes to starting a business, and specifically a photography business for the sake of this podcast, do you see any common mistakes that people are making very early on that are something that might be easily avoidable if they just had the resources to find out about it?
Yeah, I mean, we just spent a good chunk of time on the social media one, or overcomplicating, overdoing, your actions, trying to do all the things. That is the hugest one. The biggest
That works.
one. Usually, no, I'm kidding. Yeah, that's one of the biggest ones, but it's not just specific to photographers. I think for the most part, entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs, and especially with such a low barrier to entry these days in so many industries, is people get an idea, they're excited, and you either are on one end of the spectrum where you think it's going to be easier than it is. You put up your website, you put up your social, you're done, and then you don't see a return, you give up. Or the other end, that people get in, they may have that moment of, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Come overwhelmed. But then there's like this breaking point, and I don't mean, hopefully not in a bad way, but you have like this mental point where you hit a wall and you start identifying, okay, I need to simplify my offerings. I need to streamline what I'm doing. And so I guess my little encouragement before I get to answering your question is, if you're sitting there and you're like, I'm so overwhelmed right now, I don't even know where to go, that is super normal when you're first in business, especially, and I guess this is a big issue, and we kind of mentioned it before, is the panic pivot, the letting the panic or fear of rejection or panic of not getting clients drive your decisions in your business. And I think along with that, it goes back to what we were saying. You can't just build and expect people to come. You have to give it time. One thing that comes to mind while I'm talking here about this is when it comes to pricing, especially in the photography industry, where it is oversaturated, but guess what? Most industries are now too. Where it's low barrier to entry, most are too. But the thing is, we are also competing against some of, iPhones and these different type of accessibilities to our clients. Keeping in mind, it's so easy to make pricing the scapegoat for why you're not getting clients. And oftentimes when I've worked intimately with photographers, this is anecdotal, 99% of the time, majority of the time,
Right.
it has nothing to do with pricing. It has to do with everything around it, the psychology and presentation of the pricing and offerings, whether it's overwhelm or not communicating properly. It's the lack of supportive marketing. So all of a sudden, a photographer, and I see this in groups, especially in the Lawtog all the time, and I just want to hug you and say, I've been there, I get it. But you can't just change your pricing and then 2 weeks later go, well, it's my pricing. If you haven't changed purposely any of your marketing to support it, any of your messaging, and given it a runway of time for that to land with your potential clients. Because again, yeah, pricing becomes the scapegoat, and it just drives me nuts because oftentimes it's not. And if it actually is pricing that is causing the barrier, then you're targeting and you're in the wrong avenue to get the wrong people, not getting the right people there. So I guess recap on that is feeling frustrated, push through, you're going to hit the wall, you're going to have that mind-blowing revelation of how to simplify down, really stick to pushing through all of that, getting purposeful in what you're doing. On the legal side of it, though, maybe is what you were trying to get at a little bit more. I mean, I see the typical things of, and I was there too. I get it. In the very beginning, you're not sure if you're going to be able to make this entrepreneurship thing happen, or you may not even identify yourself as an entrepreneur or business owner. You're just simply, I've got a camera, I'm trying to make a buck, and I'm trying to take photographs. But when you're putting yourself out to get money, you're in business, you need to act like it. So having set up your entity properly, having contracts, having insurance, because everything that we've talked about is, and you mentioned it earlier on in the show, all of a sudden some things popped up, people have taken your photographs. It's not ever if an issue happens, it's going to be when. And so I think that is a huge one, besides the pricing thing that I see with photographers, is they'll use, I don't need a contract, I've never had a problem. Justin, inevitably, after they say that to me, a couple months later, they're in my inbox, and I want to go, I told you so, but I don't.
It happened.
I don't. I just sit by and I welcome them with open arms, and I'm like, okay, let's fix this now. Because even if you were sitting there thinking, well, I wouldn't pursue a client over a contract. One, you never know what's going to happen. And two, you don't know if a client's going to try to pursue you, especially if you're in types of photography like wedding and boudoir and those sorts of things. You're going to have more liability depending on the nature of it. You just really want to do what you can to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so funny because this is now the second time in this episode that you've hit the nail on the head with stuff that I'm currently dealing with as a business owner. And so, yeah, no, we really didn't. We really didn't. I didn't set these questions up for you to specifically address my business problems either. But it's so funny because, I mean, it just goes to show that you've seen this happen in so many cases that there's almost like, I mean, I don't want to say there's a formula to it, but there's like at least a sense of these things happen regularly. And these are things, the question was, what have you seen in beginning entrepreneurship, and what are common mistakes that are made? And that's honestly, that was exactly what happened to me. Last year was the year I went full-time into photography. And I hit that revelation. Yeah, right. Luckily, weddings still happened, and it was okay. I've managed to survive last year, but then that's when I had my revelation. I was like, okay, I get it now. I've got the marketing down. I've got the, I've got the business structure down. I know what I need to do to, really build this business up. And then I raised my prices, and then I hit that point where I had so many people knocking at my door trying to come in. I fully booked up. I think last year, between 2020 and 2022, I booked like 35 weddings in just last year, and then I raised my prices to this year, and I saw that drop off significantly. So then my thought was, well, did I overstep? Did I raise my prices too high? But you're right. And I forget who I was talking to about this. It was another photographer that we had on recently. But it was that, photography is ideally a luxury business. In the past, before cameras were $300 to get a camera with a kit lens, or you could go take photos on an iPhone, it was not something that everybody could afford because it was a very specialty career. There was a lot of training. There was a lot of, just general knowledge that went into it, and a lot of trade secrets that weren't shared on social media and out there just readily available. So it wasn't something that everybody could afford. And it was something that was a very specialty thing to have done. And now there's so much competition out there that, like you said, it's very saturated. I don't view that as a deterrent to get, to run a business in it. That otherwise I wouldn't have done it. But yeah, but it's just so funny that you say these things, because it's like, it does perfectly align with what I think I'm going through. And I can imagine a lot of people who are trying to build a business are going through as well. So that was great. Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, it's funny you say, is because if I had a nickel for every time that someone goes, well, I read about it in your group and never thought it would happen to me, or I heard you say it at a conference, but I wasn't that concerned, and then they ended up having the problem, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be on an island that I own somewhere.
Right.
That's not true. I love doing this, so I would still be here. But and it's just, I think it's, I thought also what I'm speaking about is stuff that I've learned myself. I mean, when I talk about that breaking moment, I remember I was in law school. I was trying to do all the marketing, doing all of for my photography business, trying to serve, I was doing weddings and boudoir and kids and everything, because I was panic driven. My family needed the money because I was in law school, wasn't supposed to be working. And I just remember one night I laid my head on my desk and I cried because I had all these galleries to process. I had one kid at the time. My husband was deployed to Iraq. I was also pregnant. I had all these hours of studying to do. And I was like, something's got to give. And my financial return, my financial revenue from photography, I can't give that up. We need it to live, or I need to quit law school. And it was then that I was like, okay, I'm going to get very narrow. And I asked myself, where is it that I can make the most amount of money and not have to expend a lot of either time or for babysitters? And so I narrowed in on doing female portraiture and weddings, which weddings I then got to the wayside because I realized that I could work a lot less by doing female portraiture and charge a premium and not have to spend the 6 hours of the wedding and then all the hours editing. Right. But that was what worked for me because that was in the confines of the circumstances that I had at that time in my life. And so that's another mistake that I often see is that, we alluded to this earlier. You're looking around and see what everyone else is doing, what everyone else is offering. Like you say, how many weddings you have, how many weddings that you shoot would not fit my lifestyle. It might be in the next chapter, could have been in the last chapter. But you have, as the captain of the ship, the ability to adjust and make your business model the way you want it. But it's so easy. And I'm saying this with love and holding your hands, friends. It's so easy to fall into the pit of these groups and going, well, they're doing this, they're doing that. I don't know what to do. Dabble in them, try them, give them your best effort, but make sure it fits your life because your business is supposed to be a supporting actor of your life and not your whole life.
Yeah. And, I think a little bit to add on to that is that when you're in these Facebook, social media groups and you're seeing all this stuff, I think an important thing to remember when you're looking at is social media is showing your best life, right? It's not showing your full life. And so when you see people who are maybe creating, maybe where you want to be is not fit for what your lifestyle is. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about there a little bit too, like obviously, yeah, when you have 5 kids to manage, you're running 3 businesses, shooting 35 weddings is not going to make sense for you. And it wouldn't. So, and if that can be translated to a lot of different things as well. So I think it's just important that if you're listening or watching this, that you remember that when you see somebody online who may be doing something that you look up to, there's a lot that goes into it. And it may not necessarily even just fit into what you're capable of doing. So I think there's an understanding that needs to go into photography that, yeah, it'd be great to travel and do destination weddings and shoot 30 destination weddings in a year. But if you got 3 kids, that's just not going to be a reality for you to be able to keep up with. So
not right now, but maybe it'll be a goal when the last one graduates and goes to college or whatever. Once they get out of the house,
right.
That could be a goal that you do, or even when they're in high school, it really depends on your circumstances. And I think that's a really good point that you make and comes up for me while you were talking was whatever business model you pick, you're not stuck with it. Like you can change it. And so if it's not working for you, and I think this is my big disclaimer, as long as you've really done the work, simplified down, nailed your messaging, and really leaned into getting that boulder rolling, if it just does not move at some point, you're going to have to pivot, not a panic pivot, but be very intentional on how you're going to do it and find what works best. And I know that and I get it. If you're in a position where you're having to financially support yourself and or a family, that can be very difficult to do. But even more so in those moments, you're in sink or swim. You have no choice but to figure it out.
Yeah, and maybe even if you're listening to this and thinking, well, this doesn't apply to me, it's a good reminder that to keep an eye out for these things and just know that, it's never a bad idea to have a backup plan. I mean, I'm right now I'm not looking as a backup plan, but looking as a way to expand my photography into past weddings and portraits and get into more commercial and finding other routes so that if, for example, a pandemic happens and they shut down weddings for 3 months, you have something else to fall back on. You can find a way to come up with that income in a different way, as opposed to just saying, well, my business is screwed. I can't be a wedding photographer anymore. I just lost the game. Not necessarily the case. It's just being adaptable and having that skill set of recognizing opportunities and where you need to be headed in the right direction.
Well, and another point with that also is you have to ask yourself, am I actually going to be doing photography forever? And the answer is probably going to be no. I mean, are you going to be doing it 80, 85? You don't know what your health will be, even if you want to do it. And so, that's one thing I work on a lot with my law firm clients. And also we talk about the Lawtog is planning for retirement. And I know that is so difficult if you're just in this hand to mouth type of stage of just trying to get your business off the ground and get the finances coming in. but you need to at some point look at either like a succession plan. So you're going to either remove yourself out of the business, have a team of photographers that work under you, and then you can cherry pick what you want to photograph at some point, or if you're going to sell it off, or do you need to acquire other revenue streams in addition to it to also help with that savings for retirement. And it's very difficult when you're overwhelmed and just trying to get yourself off the ground to think about that long term. But I wouldn't have thought at age 20 that I would have had cancer. And you just never know when stuff's going to happen. You never know if you're not going to be able to do that skill or that business again. And having, you'd say backup plan or having an alternative plan.
Yes.
I feel like insinuates failure sometimes, but
yes.
having and it's not failure. If you decide, and I see this, for people who get into photography, I kind of hinted at this earlier. They love photography and they're like, oh, this is a quick way to make money. And then they realize it's a lot more of a headache and they don't want to be a business owner. That's okay. You can go and be a professional second shooter, an associate shooter or an assistant. Like you can find other ways to still be involved without having to be the head of a photography business. And I love when I see people do that because they go from a very overwhelmed state to a very loving towards photography and invigorated and creative state. But they have to get over that hump to give themselves permission that it's okay. It's not failure. It's just having an alternative plan.
Yeah. And I mean, I can speak to that firsthand that when I graduated from college, I was set on being a commercial and a fashion photographer. I was like, that's what I wanted to do. But in Cleveland, Ohio, there's not a whole lot of high-paying fashion jobs, I came to find out. So
family from Ohio, I get it. I know.
Yeah. So that obviously didn't quite pan out how I thought it was going to, but pivoted. I came up with a backup plan. I found a mentor, which mentorship is a recurring theme on this episode, or not this episode, sorry, this podcast. But I found a mentor and directed me in the direction of weddings, and it totally changed the game for me. And it wasn't where I thought I would be heading. And then I don't exactly know in 5 years where I'll be heading, but I've already begun to think of, like you were kind of talking about, like an exit strategy. Like how do I build this up to the point that, yeah, you're right. Like when I'm 55, I don't want to be shooting 30 weddings a year. That sounds horrible. And it's going to take up so much time. And if I have kids or, who knows what happens down the road, but that's just probably not the reality that I'll be facing. And so I'm trying to find a way to redirect this and think, okay, now where will I be, setting those 3, 5, and 10-year goals of where I want to see the business heading and how I'm going to get to there is a really important thing. I think that photographers should be keeping up with as well. I always write down my goals for the year at the beginning of the year, and I revise my 3 to 5 year plan at the beginning of the year as well, just trying to figure out, okay, what direction am I heading in now?
Yeah, business planning, I'm glad you mentioned that. I should have said that earlier. It's the failure to plan I often see in newer business owners, newer photographers. Again, no fault. I get it. You're overwhelmed. You're just trying to get through what you're doing today. But you definitely have to have a vision for it because that's also going to help guide you in the commitments that you make, in who you're going to try to serve, what offerings you're going to try to offer. If you have a plan of eventually, like I did with phasing out weddings, I had to make the plan of, okay, by this date, if I don't want to do weddings anymore by Y date, then by Z date, I have those reversed, whatever. You all know what I mean.
Yes.
I have to have this amount of revenue coming in from this other niche when I did the transitioning. And so you have to be very purposeful because you can't just show up that day and go, oh, no more weddings. And then you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs. And I know that some people are listening going, oh, that's common sense, but it's a lot more common than you think because we get swept up in our businesses and we're working in our business and not on our business a lot. And especially if you're overwhelmed and stressed, and I'm raising my hand on this one because even now, 16 years into business, my team can also tell when I'm stressed about something because I'll start coming in and doing busy work as opposed to doing like strategy and goal setting and reviewing of KPIs, key performance indicators and such like that. They'll go,
Sure.
Okay, what's going on? Because I translate my energy into doing little busy tasks as opposed to what I need to be doing. And so watch for that, and I share that really transparently because you don't have to be newer in business for that to happen to you. It happens to me frequently. And it could be something completely unrelated to business. If I had something going on at home or just the world, like the pandemic last year, I started getting into more busy work and I had to tell myself, okay, I've got to get out of this if I'm going to meet that goal for this month, this quarter, and this year. And so go back to the ship analogy. Yeah. It's the star in the sky that's going to help you, make the corrections you need on the ship.
Yeah, I mean, it's that reality check that I think a lot of people, everybody needs, I should say. Everybody runs into a point where they're going to need that reality check to just make sure that they're in the right place and when they're heading in the right direction. And sometimes it's hard to, it can be difficult to look at yourself and kind of self-reflect on that and find where your flaws are, where you're maybe not performing where you need to be performing. But at the end of the day, it's a necessary part of growing your business and just being, candid with yourself as to what's working and what's not working.
And there's
Um,
an ego aspect to that too. I
True.
think that as business owners, and I don't necessarily mean that negatively, but again, I've been there and I kind of seen this in myself before of you get this inflated sense in almost complacency. And so you back off, go back to the boulder, you go back off of pushing the boulder to the point that you're not even touching it. Well, inertia can only go so long. So if you become complacent in your marketing or whatever business action because of ego or you think you got this, it's going to slow and stop at some point. I'm not saying you have to keep running full speed with the boulder to keep it pushing, but you have to at least, you can't completely let go and expect it to continue going.
Yeah, got to keep the hands on the boulder. Yep, that's a great tip as well. But I wanted to ask you about something else here too, because I was going through your Instagram account as well, and I just thought that this was something really important that I think a lot of people who want to get into photography don't take into account, or sorry, I shouldn't say want to get into it, but professionally at least, if they want to run their own business, they don't take some things into account because they look at it as, oh, I just want to start making all this money off photography. There's a lot of, the business side of things, I think typically doesn't come naturally to creative oriented people. And
That's
there are
why you're good at
exceptions.
being creative.
Right, right. Yeah, the left brain, right brain thing, right? But at the same time, it is important. I mean, if you're going to run your own business, you have to have that business understanding. You have to know, I nerd out over marketing and business stuff, but I also love taking photos. So I guess it works for me, but some people hate the idea of marketing and hate the idea of learning about running a business. And you shared something, I believe you called it the legal triad.
Oh, yeah.
On the posts. And I mean, essentially, it was like 3 key tools that protect you and the liability in your business. So, would you maybe mind explaining what those 3 tools are and expand on why protection of liability is important as a photographer and a business owner?
Yeah, I had kind of dropped them in earlier real quickly, but I'm glad we came back around to this. When we're looking at being a business owner, photographer or not, you want to protect yourself against liability. Like we mentioned before, you may not be thinking you're going to do anything wrong, but your clients might think otherwise, and life just happens, right? So we want to have 3 key tools in place, the legal triad. Your business entity. So this is United States based. I'm a US based attorney. So general information, my whole disclaimer, I'm not your lawyer unless you want me to be, yada, yada, yada. But what I would say is you need to have an entity like an LLC, limited liability company, or a corporation. And I have yet to find a photographer that doesn't at least a single photographer who needs an LLC to have a protection. Because what happens when you create that entity is it is setting up the business separate from yourself. So when a problem happens, not if, when a problem happens, hopefully all that client or opposing party can touch is anything that's in that LLC. And this is extremely important, especially if you have another career, if you have assets, if you are in a marriage with someone that also has assets or security clearance, et cetera, you want to have that separation. LLC and corporation do both of this for you. LLC just typically is cheaper and easier to manage for photographers. So that's one key piece. The second is we want to have liability insurance. And I recommend all of these 3 as layers in your business because almost like hurdles between you and the potential liability. Why liability insurance is important, even if you're an LLC or a corporation, is because it can act to, it's insurance. The insurance company can help take care of any claim and or provide monetary support for attorney's fees if you end up getting sued. And it happens quite frequently all the time, especially during pandemic. It happened a lot. Because even though you thought you were in the right, the client thought you were in the wrong, all of a sudden they're filing in court and you have to show up or you get a default judgment. And so if you didn't have a liability insurance that could just take care of the claim or at least provide attorney's fees, you may have been on the hook for that. Which brings me to tool number 3, which is contracts. I love contracts, and it's not just because I'm an attorney. It's because I am a business owner like you that wants to do a couple of things. One, I want to be legally protected. So I want to have in there Things like, if you do sue me and I win, I get the attorney's fees, because you don't get it otherwise unless it's written in the statute. In a simple breach of contract case, it's not probably going to be available to you. So you at least want to have something like that in there. But the contract, number one, sets the legal relationship. It's the obligations of what you and the client are going to do and what you're going to get for an exchange, all that good stuff. What I love about contracts even more than that is it does a couple of things. One, it sets expectations. There is one central place that you should have almost everything that your client would expect from you and you would expect from them. So you're not having to necessarily repeat it all the time, and there's no miscommunication. The majority of legal issues that I see between photographers and clients are simply due to miscommunications. They're not from huge, egregious things. I mean, we hear the stories in the news about the photographers who took all this wedding money that never showed up, or that sort of stuff. That's atypical. The typical problem that we see when it's between photographer and client is missed expectations, miscommunication, and all of a sudden the client feels like they didn't get what they were owed and they're pulling you into court. And so I love having a contract in place for that. But last, and probably most importantly, especially this helped me, this was a mind-blowing revelation when I was first starting out in photography, that fear of rejection. You don't want to tell your client no on something, but they push and they push and they push the boundaries and they want more. They want to see the unedited images. They want all the images, all of this stuff. I love that a contract can be a no man for you. Some people may not have that problem. And I definitely think, I don't want to make this a male female thing, but I do think that females have a tendency to give in on that stuff a bit more. So having a contract kind of helps you to have a backbone. It gives a no man for you. So you're not necessarily the one saying no. The contract is the one, because you can simply say, well, per our contract, you're only entitled to 10 images, not the 500 that you want. So I much enjoy that, because I'm not, even though I'm an attorney, I'm not big on confrontation when it's with my own clients. And if they ask for more, then oftentimes I feel like I always have to give it, but it can, which is fine. Again, you're the captain of the ship. You can offer customer service, but there becomes a point where you start to become feeling like you're a doormat and become resentful. And so the bar is there with contracts. That's the minimum. And I think that's what's so important people don't understand, is that the contract's the minimum. You can always go above and beyond. You can give the client more, but it's there if you need that protection. So to recap, business entity, liability insurance, and then having your contracts in place.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all three of those things are super key. And the contract thing, I mean, I can relate to those people who may be listening and thinking, I don't need one of those. It just is going to inhibit people from wanting to work with me. And let me just tell you, that is not the case at all. And also, let me tell you that there's been more than a few occasions where my contract has saved me. And just like you said, it just served as the backbone mainly, people asking for more, or people, not sure what I was supposed to be delivering, or feeling like they didn't get what they asked for. Just the other day, somebody was like, hey, I thought I was only supposed to pay this amount. And I showed them the contract. I said, no, it was actually this amount because of this other thing that you wanted. And so it's good to have. And then you fall back on it. Hopefully you never need to do that, or hopefully you'll never need to fall back on it in court or anything like that. But it is a safety net that has saved me more than a couple times. And, just to plug your website again, I believe you have a free sample contract on your website. Is that correct too?
Yeah, so we have a contracts kit that walks you through the different types. And then we have a plethora of contract forms, whether it's the main services contract all the way up through hiring or an associate or second shooter and all of that, because it is so important. And again, I'm not saying this as an attorney. I've seen it in real life in my own photography business. I've seen it with y'all in your photography businesses. And something hit me while you were talking is, the goal is to keep out of court. Contracts can also help to do that, like you're talking about. If you hadn't had a contract for that, and your client felt so entitled to all of that, and you felt like, I'm not going to give them, that I really want my other amount of money, you're going to end up in court. And the only people that honestly win in court are the attorneys. Don't do that. No, and now all my attorney friends are probably like, gee, thanks. But it's true.
Rachel, shut up.
Yeah, I know. But here's my thing is, I would honestly rather make my money as an attorney working to be proactive in your business versus reactive. There's a story I share all the time, and it's the common theme, because I've seen it hundreds of times happen, is that photographer doesn't want to pay the $400 or $500 to get the services contract, model release, print release, and all that done initially ends up getting sued and ends up spending $10,000 to defend it, even if they win, but don't get attorney's fees because they didn't have a contract. And then what happens in the end? They still have to pay the $500 to get a contract going forward. It's like, it's a common thing that happens all the time. And it really hurts my heart when I'm on the phone with a photographer and they're crying and they're like, this is my livelihood. And I'm like, here we are. Like this is where we're at. This is what we can do to mitigate the costs. But here's the things, and much what we just talked about here. Here's the tools that you need to have going forward to avoid this.
Yeah, and I think everybody wants to see the best in people, and especially as a business owner, when you're working with intimately with clients like you do in photography, a lot of the times, you want to see the best in them. But the reality is, there's people out there who are looking to take advantage of other people and are looking for free things and are looking for a way, that they can make a quick buck off of you too. So not everybody out there is going to be, happy-go-lucky, ideal client. You will run into some people who you maybe do a favor for and they expect more out of it, and then it comes back to bite you in the butt. So it is definitely a good thing to. Now, actually, that just made me think of something. Now, if somebody is, maybe they're just starting out, but they're like, yeah, they understand the importance of a contract. Is it a now? And I'm sure I know what the ideal answer is, right? Is to have a written legal document by a lawyer, right? But is it good to even just have the things written out and get a signature from your clients, even if you can't, maybe afford it up front, or is that not? Don't advise that at all.
This is a hard thing to answer because I've been there. I did have two nickels to rub together when I first started my businesses. Like I was waiting tables in the evenings and at home in the day with our son. And so I get it. Like all my money went back into the business. So I have a compassionate side of that. The other side, the lawyer side of me is, yes, you could, but it depends on what's on. I hate that answer. It depends, but it
Right.
is. That's the lawyer answer. It depends on what's written on the paper. What I end up seeing is people go out and they try to cobble together contracts where they use their friends and they don't really know where it came from. And there are ways that can draft against you, especially if you don't understand it. And so it depends on what state you're in. Does it have to be fairly balanced? Can it be, going to be 90, 10, 20, 90? Oh my gosh, this is why I'm a lawyer. 90, 10. You have to know like what state you're in, what the content is going to be in order to see if it's even going to be worth it. Will it maybe outline the communications and set the expectations of you and your client? Sure. But as to what it would do from a legal standpoint, I don't know. And I would hate to say, that compassionate side wants me to say, yes, it's better than nothing. But it's hard, especially when we are. How much do you spend on your camera and your lenses? Like, how much are we really throwing into presets and education? Do you know what I mean? Like, and
absolutely.
That's one of the reasons that the Lawtog was created, besides providing this information, was I know that people don't have thousands of dollars to go to an attorney. I get that. And on top of that, there's not a lot of attorneys that have been photographers that truly understand the ins and outs of our very nuanced industry. And so that's what the Lawtog is there for. But even then, I understand that if you're in that no two nickels to rub together situation, I mean, read between the lines here, I guess, if you will. I can't recommend it, but
and I had a feeling that too. I mean, obviously, like I also have a property business, and I was asking an attorney about some stuff related to that, and it's kind of the same thing. They're like, obviously, I'm not going to advise you to have a contract not written by an attorney. That's that's never going to be ideal. But I get that for sure, but I also feel like, at least having what the expectations are outlined is a good starting point for somebody who maybe is just, maybe you're in high school and you're taking senior pictures or something like that, and you don't have serious, there's certain scenarios I could see where maybe that works. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there are great resources out there like the Lawtog that can help you and do it in a way that's not going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars upfront just to get these things accomplished. So it's definitely, it's great that you have a resource out there like I should say it's great for people to have a resource out there like yourself where they can go and seek that information and knowledge if they want to. But that kind of also led me into something else too. I wanted to ask you a little bit about copyright itself, because I think that's so important when it comes to photography and intellectual property. I think a lot of people don't understand necessarily what their rights are as a creator, and what the necessary steps are that they need to take to protect their images. So, I'm sure this is something that you could probably talk about for hours on
Oh,
end.
we can
So,
do a whole episode on this. Yes,
so
yes.
maybe just touch on some of the key points of, what should a photographer be, doing to make sure that they're protecting their images, and also what rights does a photographer have to an image that they created if they do run into an instance where somebody may be stealing it and using it for their own purposes.
Yeah, so at the very beginning of the episode, I had mentioned we are a little different industry in that not only do we have intellectual property like business name, logos, and using photographs to market our business, we're actually selling photographs too, whether you're selling the copyright or you're selling a license, print release, that sort of stuff. And so we've got even like an additional responsibility here to understand copyright. In the United States, if you're working for yourself, your entity, you own the copyrights, generally speaking, own the copyright to the photographs that you take. It's also where a contract comes into place, because the only way for for copyright to be transferred is either if you're an employee of someone's business or by contract. And, one of the top questions we always hear from clients is, can I have all the rights? Well, always, before you freak out and run into the Lawtog group and then you'll be like, oh my God, they want all the copyrights. Ask the client, what rights do they really want? Typically, they just want to be able to print the images for Grandma Jane that lives in Seattle to make her a sweater and put on her mantle. Like, they're not actually looking to own the copyrights. There are exceptions, always going to happen. But for the most part, you are the owner of the photograph. So you get to choose. Hopefully, you didn't sign it away in contract if you're wanting to retain the copyright ownership. I do think the copyright conveyance, from you to client is appropriate in situations of like commercial product photography that had maybe sometimes headshots, that sort of stuff. But really, personal portraiture, you pretty much retain it. But however, here's the thing: when somebody infringes, because it's not if, it's going to be when it happens, because everyone's snagging stuff off, putting it on their Instagram feeds, and this happens to me all the time. I do this for a living, and people will snag my photos and then tag me in them and put it on their commercial Instagram. And I'm over here going, well, thank you for tagging me to show me you're infringing on my photo.
Yeah.
Not only my photo, but then my publicity rights, because I'm the one in the photo. But why that's important is because when it happens, and I always have photographers, it's like with the contracts things, when they say, oh, they don't have a problem. Even if someone took it, I'm not going to pursue them. Large corporations, and this is where I get excited because I love like the whole David Goliath. I love to go after large corporations on behalf of photographers. They're utilizing photographers' intellectual property, photographs, at warp speed. They're putting them into social media campaigns and catalogs in their stores, and they have deep pockets. And the thing is, if you have not taken the steps to actually register your photograph at the Copyright Office, you're only looking at actual damages, which could be like loss of licensing, maybe some benefit to them if there was any benefit at all. And then also, one of the key things is when you haven't taken the steps to register with the Copyright Office, these companies can ignore you because they know that you can't walk into court the next day. You're going to have to go get the registration, then, wait for that to happen, and then maybe file a lawsuit. And often at that point, you're not going to have statutory damages, which let me give you some numbers. A typical photographer's licensing rate that we see of actual damages is going to be maybe a couple thousand. Whereas if they had a registration prior to infringement, or the exception, there's a grace period after when you publish a photograph where you can register after infringement. But typically speaking, you need to register with the Copyright Office prior to infringement. It switches it from a couple thousand to an up to 150,000 plus attorney's fees, which, if you haven't heard the common theme here, attorney's fees are what's going to kill you. So quit letting the lawyers win and, hedge your bets there. And copyright registration with the Copyright Office is extremely low cost, factored in your cost of doing business, pass it on to the clients, put it on a routine workflow, get it done, and you'll be prepared for when it happens, when infringement happens.
Yeah, I mean, and that last part is what caught me off. So in college, I took a business law class just to have a general understanding of what I would be doing as owning my own business. And that was one of the things that we didn't talk about. I mean, copyright was kind of a segment of that class, but it wasn't really, it wasn't geared towards intellectual property itself. So I was under the impression, and what I'd always thought was that if I created the image, I own the copyright to it. What I didn't know is that when somebody infringed upon the copyright, that if I wanted to have any legal standing, significant legal standing against it, that I needed to have already registered that image with the Copyright Office. So it was a hard way to learn because immediately afterwards I kicked myself for not doing it. But it was an eye-opening experience, and that's kind of what I was hoping to hear from you and explain that to photographers, because I think a lot of people misunderstand copyright and don't really understand what it is.
Well, because of that, the majority of cases that come to us through the law firm are unregistered photographs, and we get recoveries. But this conversation, like we just had here, I apply it to their situation and I show them the numbers, and they're going, oh, and I'm like, well, I've been around for 15 years saying this to y'all people on the internet, like, but I'm sympathetic. I joke, but I am sympathetic. I get that once it happens, it's kind of difficult to, swallow the pill of it. But it's also part of the mentality of, well, I'll never pursue anyways. You never know who's going to take the photograph. I mean, the common thing that we are seeing is these large corporations are using third-party marketing agencies, and you would think they would know better, but they're just snagging off the internet all the time. And it's inevitably, and they try to bury small photographers because they know that they don't have the funds. And so that's when we come in, we do flat rate contingency type stuff. But yeah, it definitely is one of these things that I wish there was like a requirement that this is the class you needed to take when you become a photographer. I mean, we have these classes on the Lawtog, but I wish it was just so that y'all could really have the tools in place for when these problems happen. And, the other fallacy that I hear a lot, and I see it in groups all the time, is, oh, well, it was such and such large corporation name. They can pay you hundreds of thousands. But the facts have to support it. Like, it has to be worth the hundreds of thousands, not simply because they're a large corporation are they going to pay you that. You really have to look at what the facts are and have it analyzed to make sure. And there's been some situations where we've taken unregistered photographs, we've done an expedited registration, new infringements popped up by the same party, even during negotiations. I don't know what they were thinking, but it shifted the whole conversation and we were able to get an even better return. But that's, I think, is why it's so important is learn the copyright law, but then when it happens, get a legal assessment, because you might be able to throw a Hail Mary and really change the name of the game if you want a recovery.
Yeah, wow. And I didn't know the recovery thing either, so that's interesting to hear as well. And you also kind of, I wanted to circle back to this because I think I'm sure you've probably seen it or you've heard it from the photographers, but I see this all the time because tagging other accounts is become super important on Instagram, right? So people are always, and a lot of the times, like as a content creator, and maybe not for you or for some people, they don't like it, but I look at it as a way to potentially build up an audience and expand my audience if I'm tagging an account specifically hoping that they'll share the image that I took. But I did a YouTube video where I styled a whole photo shoot using the app Wish, which is, knock off everything pretty much. And I got a comment on my post from Wish saying like, "Hey, reply yes if we can use this image." And and I said no, but they tried these little sneaky tactics to get away and get the permission to use the images for their own marketing materials. And while in the meantime, Wish is sitting there making hundreds of thousands of dollars each month, probably off of images that may not even be theirs or they may not have the rights to. And I think there's a lot of photographers out there who just don't understand their rights and know, yeah, you should be getting a licensing fee for that at the very least. If they're not purchasing, I don't know, I don't ever sell my copyright, but some may. And, at the very least, you should be getting a licensing fee for them using it and being able to benefit off of that.
Yeah, 100%. That's one thing I wanted to say earlier about when I was like, primarily personal portraiture, our industry standard right now is that photographers are retaining copyright. But for me, that's one of the considerations of should I sell the copyright? Because if it's just going to sit on your dusty hard drive in your office and it's not doing things for you, you're not licensing it, then why not make the couple extra bucks on the front end to your client by selling the copyright? I think that's another misconception. It's like, the industry says you have to retain it. And I'm like, but what are you doing with it? Like, if you're not going to maximize it now with your client, then you need to be at least maximizing it through licensing somehow.
Right, right. Yeah, that makes total sense too. I mean, if it comes down to the dollar amount that you're looking to get out of it, if and I've had that happen a couple times before too, where ultimately it is just an image that maybe I took that didn't amount to anything. I just took it and I didn't get paid for it, but at the same time, there's your opportunity to make a buck off of it. So you kind of got to weigh your options out, I guess, as you um, are considering what you're selling and how you're going to go about selling it. So that makes total sense. And then, I told you I was going to come back to this a little bit later on, and I did want to kind of get your, thoughts on it. But obviously, COVID was uh, presented a lot of unexpected issues for photographers and business owners alike over the course of the past year, and many people weren't ready for it. Their contracts weren't ready for it. And it showed. And you even referenced in the past year there was, I mean, I can imagine how many lawsuits, especially when it comes to things like weddings and stuff like that. But I know that in my contract that I have, I did not have anything in place for a global pandemic. So I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there who didn't. But I imagine that led to tons of inquiries from on the Lawtog about what to do and how they can approach this. And now things seem to slowly be recovering and getting back to the right direction. But what sort of lessons do you think photographers should be taking from this past year in order to protect themselves in the future?
Yeah, so there were three key things, not all of them, but three key ones that I found that either if you had a contract, this is what was missing: a proper cancellation type clause, rescheduling. And this is really more for like wedding photographers because it's really easy to reschedule a standard portrait. Maybe newborn would be another one. Any other type time sensitive photography would really need these. So cancellation, reschedule, then force majeure. Now here's the thing: you just mentioned my contract didn't contemplate a global pandemic. Well, force majeure provisions are typically drafted broad. So it could be all encompassing of that. It should have like the language including but not limited to, but it's essentially saying there's extenuating circumstances out of whichever party's control that you would be relieved of non-performance under the contract. Now, here's the big thing is it depended upon where you lived and what the language said of how long that force majeure clause could actually be invoked. And everyone, clients jumped on it. The media was actually giving, I had done so many interviews about it, and the reporters would say, well, don't have force majeure, got to give back all the money. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Depending on where you live, some places only had a 3-month shutdown. Some places had a 9-month shutdown. And force majeure was only limited to very specific circumstances. So a lot of what photographers were having to rely upon was their cancellation or rescheduling provisions. And so even if you didn't have force majeure, if you at least had those, then there's something that could help you in there. As an aside, especially for wedding photographers, having proper language connected to like a non-refundable initial payment. And I say initial payment because it can be retainer or deposit depending upon where you live and what the case law demands for it. But why it's important is you want to have language that's not simply saying it's non-refundable upon payment, but what is it connected to? Like things like reservation of the date, turning away other clients, my mind's going blank, initial consultation. All these sorts of things are services that you render upon payment, but you needed to have that language in there. And so I guess it's 4 major things really to look for to have in your contract. So either people didn't have a contract or they had one that did not cover these bases.
Yeah, yeah, and that was, I saw a lot of questions being asked in Facebook groups of what do I do? And obviously that's probably not your best resource to find that information out. But it was definitely a challenging time for many photographers. And I mean, and just, well, generally I saw a lot in the wedding industry because those were shut down, depending on where you were at, for months. And so I know some people who lost I myself only lost 2 weddings, while I know some people who lost 50 weddings. So it's, it was a lot in between. And it was, I think a lot of it, now, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's people out there who were sticklers and just wanted to get aggressive and go straight to court with things. But a lot of it came down to how you dealt with your clients and how you,
100%.
yeah, and how you went about coping with it because everybody was in the same situation together. I didn't see too many horror stories from photographers, but at the same time, I think a lot of it came down to, again, the communication aspect of photography and how you went about working with your clients to make sure that you were, one, taking care of their needs and also taking care of yourself at the same time.
And being proactive was a huge thing. And I think a lot of photographers, and it wasn't just exclusive to photographers, but a lot of entrepreneurs in general were very gun shy about, being the proactive person to their clients. But that is one of those little straws on the camel's back, right? It starts to add up after a while. And we are the professionals and it was simply a fear thing. They didn't understand their contract, or they didn't know what to do, and they didn't feel like they had a resource that could help them with that. And until they ended up coming to us once there was a problem. But I feel like, and you hit it on the head, the majority of the issues probably were resolved through having good communication, proactive communication, and having a contract in place. And even then, most people were human, but I've seen the horror stories. I mean, nature of the job, right? So
Sure.
I've seen the horror stories that come out of it, and we're just trying to proactively prevent against that happening. One of those situations happening to you in the future, is we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, so going back to what we said before, I didn't know I would have cancer at age 20, and I've seen stuff, in normal life, quote unquote, is that people end up, they weren't due for 20 more weeks in their pregnancy and end up having a premature baby. It's having the proper supports in place, because you just don't know what's going to happen in life.
Yeah, definitely. Most definitely. Well, Rachel, seriously, thank you so much for like just sharing this incredibly valuable insight, because I do really think that this is stuff that a lot of photographers don't take into account. They don't think about on a daily basis. And it is something that is super important just to being a professional photographer. So I definitely appreciate the insights into entrepreneurship, business in general, and law that you've provided us so far. I know I will certainly be looking into some of your courses on there. And I did want to say, I did notice that you guys have some COVID specific information on there as well. So if anybody is struggling with that or still having some issues with it, definitely check out the Lawtog, because that's a great resource to look into that. But usually at this point in the segment, we kind of deviate a little bit from the business specific questions and get into a little bit more of some fun questions. So are you okay with getting into a couple more?
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right, awesome. So I saw in one of your most recent YouTube videos that you talk about how busyness does not equal business. And as someone who runs multiple successful businesses, a Team USA athlete, and a mother of 5, how do you go about finding a healthy balance between work and your home life, and just kind of keeping that all working well together?
Yeah, I try to schedule everything. So like Wednesdays today, as when we're recording, is all like recording days, because then I know that I can have a quiet environment. I get dressed up, but it also productivity wise, I know that on certain days I do certain businesses, certain times a day I do certain tasks, but even within that, there's grace and there's flexibility. So if things come up, things need to change, but I make sure to build all that into the schedule as much as possible. But the way I do, honestly, my personal stuff goes on there first. Like I don't do calls before noon, because that's dedicated to taking care of my workout. I can do appointments, like personal family appointments and such, and maybe if I need to do stuff around the house. And as well as I can sit down and do my own like creative, non-business type of hobby type stuff. And so I always try to carve out on certain days, certain times that are just for me. Because in the beginning, I was like, "Oh, business is for me," and it really isn't. Your business is not here to entertain you. So if you get bored in your business, get a hobby. But really, like you don't want to get all busy. And like I mentioned before, early on in the episode, when I start feeling anxious about some things, I see it manifest, and I start getting into the weeds of the business and mistaking, that for busyness versus
Right.
business, and it's not moving the needle. It's tasks that I don't need to be doing. My kids don't need to touch. So I just have to be mindful of that. And I think having the schedule helps, because it knows when I sit down, I only have X amount of time for these things. And so I
Mhm.
get it done.
Yeah, and I mean, and not to try to put words in your mouth or anything, but you've said it a little bit earlier about delegation. You have a team that you work with; you're able to delegate some of that work out, and then also it just sounds like you're on top of your schedule and making sure that you know where you're allocating your time and where it needs to be put on a daily basis, or even an hourly basis. It almost sounds like. So I think the time management aspect is also a huge skill that a lot of people can work on and improve on. I know I myself can definitely benefit from a little bit better on the time management side of things. Cool.
Error. I mean, I'm still learning how to do it. And so
Mhm.
you just have to fine tune little corrections as you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure as a business grows, it's never, last year's never the same as this year. You can't, you got to be adaptable in that aspect of it too, I'm sure. Cool. So every episode, I ask a guest a variation of this question, just because I'm curious. Every guest try to have on here is running a successful business, and I think as somebody who is just starting out or is contemplating starting a business, that this is a pretty valuable question, because a lot of people starting out don't really have a lot of capital to put into their business, or maybe they're working and trying to balance a work and side hustle business. So let's imagine that if a tragedy struck in some fictitious world where you had to completely try to rebuild your business from the ground up, and you only had $500 to initially invest into that business, how would you allocate that money to ensure a positive ROI and to continue building that business?
Well, I mean, if you'd asked me this 15 years ago, the answer would be a little different because we have such free technology platforms now. So I would invest it in probably social media, an email list. So what MailChimp can cost like 30, $40, and then getting really quality, which as photographers, we can do our own visual assets for social media, and then just create a lot of content.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are in such a content-driven world right now, and being able using those. Well, let me like dive a little deeper into that. So, when you say social media, do you mean specifically on social media ads? Do you mean on classes? How would you go about that?
I was just thinking just posting,
Hmm.
I would then dive into the very specific. That's a really good question. It's getting me thinking. Initially, I was just thinking just the platform, but if I'm going to really capitalize and maximize my money, I would probably need a little education for the platform and then maybe some ads too.
Hmm.
Think, I think ads have their place, especially now.
Yeah.
Especially now. But I truly believe you can grow at least your initial stages of your business to a healthy financial return without paid ads.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the ads are kind of like the icing on top, right? Like if you're doing things right, you should be reaching new people pretty consistently. But then to just capitalize on that, if you got some people who are kind of slow to your business, the ads just kind of help keep bringing them back. And I know that you guys are on top of that because as soon as I searched your guys' Instagram page, I started getting the ads. So it's never a bad thing to just keep redirecting people back to you to make sure that they're seeing you and keeping that top of mind awareness for sure. And then, as I mentioned before, like mentorship has been a key aspect of a lot of what I've talked to professionals about in the course of this podcast, especially this year specifically. So many of our guests recommend finding a mentor to help build your business and help kind of speed track you past some of the mistakes that they may have made in the past. But you yourself are a business mentor. And so I wanted to ask you kind of what's your favorite part about mentoring entrepreneurs?
For me, the reason I got into business initially, besides not really fitting and conforming to the whole 9 to 5 cubicle farm type aspect, was that I wanted to be able to be flexible. I mentioned it before. I wanted my business to be a supporting actor of my life. I wanted to have the flexibility. So our businesses are actually built on the pillars of freedom. So freedom financially, physically, and emotionally. And when I work with entrepreneurs and help them to put these measures in place, legal or not, working towards those goals when they accomplish it, I just absolutely love it because I know the way having those three pillars built in my life and has supported where I'm at and how I love to live my life now and who knows what it's going to look like in the future to have other people have that feeling and that, and especially we definitely saw this manifested during pandemic, like because we have built towards the physical and financial and emotional freedoms in all the businesses. It was really a hiccup for us. It really wasn't this earth-shattering thing when pandemic hit. And so it was sad to see so many people trying to scramble in response who hadn't had these types of supports in place. So when they do get it, because having cancer, I know that it's going to be when something happens, they're
Hmm.
going to be prepared for it and they're going to be able to be around. I mean, this past year, who would have thought I'd been quote unquote homeschooling 5 kids?
Yeah, right.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
But because I had already put all the supports in place, I mean, I still had to adjust things. It still was difficult, but I was afforded way more benefit and more presence to be in capabilities to deal with what pandemic threw than people that didn't have those in place. And so I just wanted it for others.
Now, I kind of have a question for you based off that because I kind of, after my limited experience I've had with lawyers, I've come to understand that they kind of have a worst case scenario mentality a lot of the time. So is that where those pillars kind of came from? Is just thinking that if things could go wrong, I want to make sure that I am properly, secured or have a plan in place for that?
My initial answer was going to say no, but then again, think about my entrepreneurship aligned with my cancer diagnosis, so that might have had something to play into it. My
Okay.
dad has always preached quality of life. Like, take a pay cut so you're not schlepping up and down I-95 for 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
Like, having the quality of life, being present with your family. And I worked at the Attorney General's office for a bit in DC, and I never saw my kid. And that was really, that pushed me even further to, I got to make this entrepreneurship stuff work, because I wanted to be able to be present and be here. Like, I'll be here when the kids get home shortly. So it just, yeah, good question. There might be some like subconscious because of the cancer stuff, but top of
Mhm.
mind is just quality of life.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense too. So also, this is a question I like to ask every guest too, because everyone comes from different backgrounds, and I'm always curious to see where their inspirations come from. So, do you have any recommended reading material when it comes to whether business or legal or photography in general?
Yes. And actually, they're sitting right next to me. Dr. Richard Caldini has written two different books. One's called The Influence Power of Persuasion, and then he has a persuasion one. And I was actually thinking about these books earlier when we were having the pricing conversation about people blame pricing and they don't look at the psychology around like sales and messaging and stuff. Those two books I go back to again. They're so ratty tatted, highlighted up, because I go back to them, and I even have the audiobooks over and over. And they just, the more that I listen to them, they help to demand and navigate my actions in business. And I definitely have seen the fruits of it. So Dr. Richard Caldini, I hope I'm not butchering.
That's okay. We'll add the links to them in the show notes. I'll make sure I find those. But yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, it's definitely an important part. And any book, I truly feel like if there's any book that somebody has that's rattered, tattered, and just totally highlighted, it has enough principles to go by that it's well worth the read. So it's awesome. So we'll definitely be adding that link to the show notes so people can check it out. And so I just wanted to thank you again one last time, Rachel, for coming on. We do have a question from a guest, but before we get, or sorry, a guest from a listener. But before we get to that, I did want to open it up to you, just kind of allow you to maybe plug some stuff that you've got going on, or where people can find you if they want more information. Where's the easiest place to get more information about you and the Lawtog?
Yeah, so all the Lawtog stuff is at thelawtog.com. That's very specific on like the contract, setting up legal business, copyright, all that stuff. If you're looking for a bit more business help and knowledge, over at rachelbrenke.com is where all of my business consulting. We actually have an accelerator program where we go over the legal, but we also go over the financial, the balancing family business, a lot of the topics that we talked about here, quitting your 9 to 5 to do this full time. And so that's more of an all encompassing. But if you just Google me, I'm the only Rachel Brenke, everything will pop up, or else you can reach out on social media, and myself or the team will get you what you need.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'm a testament to that. We got you on the podcast. We made it happen. So awesome. Great. Well, we do have one question, like I said, from a listener. I put out there that we were going to be having you on today. So I wanted to, see if there was anybody who had any specific questions. Now, we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I don't know if we got any, too specific about it. But this is from our listener named Alex. And he asked, what are the most overlooked parts of a client contract that every photographer should include?
Okay. I mean, we already touched on non-refundable initial payment, cancellation, rescheduled, and force majeure. That was pretty much tied to pandemic, but can be used all the time. The other things are really all about your payment schedule, when they're going to pay, what they're going to pay, what you're going to render. And then in the legal miscellany, we touched on this, attorney's fees is huge, what your dispute resolution method's going to be. Are you going to require mediation or arbitration, or is it silent? They can go full hog in court. Those are probably the biggest key things that I see. If you go to the Lawtog, though, we bullet point what's in all our contracts. Feel free to copy and paste that bullet point and take it to your local attorney if you want.
Awesome. And, and I just had a question too, actually, that came to mind, because I know you mentioned it and I kind of I think I got a little distracted from it earlier, but the initial payment part, which is something that I've heard debated amongst photographers all the time, and I don't trust anything that I hear from a photographer because who actually knows? But so is that something that on a state to state basis is, a retainer versus a deposit versus initial payment? Is that something that is, in court viewed differently depending on what the wording is?
Yeah, depends on what the case law on the books is for that state. So for me, I generally just do a non-refundable initial payment or initial fee. And then like we talked about connecting it to very specific services of, scheduling on the calendar, consultation, et cetera, so that it's earned when it's paid. So I get into those whole back and forth. People tag me all the time. What is right? I'm like, just avoid it. So that's one of the things with a contract. You don't want ambiguity. So just take it out and just make it a payment.
Interesting. Okay. I've not heard that take, but it makes total sense to me. If you classify it as not a retainer or a deposit, then there's no debate as to what it is. Cool. Okay. Well, anyways, Alex, thank you so much for your question. As always, if you are listening and you have any questions about photography or business and want to ask a professional on a future episode, please feel free to email them over to social@thepixelconnection.com for a chance to have them answered on the episode. And Rachel, again, one last time, thank you so much for joining me today on the Talking Pixels podcast, sponsored by the Pixel Connection. And with that, today we're going to conclude today's episode. So I appreciate you taking the time out of your no doubt busy schedule to be here with me today. And I hope that you have a great and successful rest of your 2021 with all your businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
And before we wrap up today's episode, I have some exciting news from our sponsor over at the Pixel Connection. If you haven't heard, Canon has announced the release of the Canon RF 14 to 35mm f4L lens. That's right. And you can pre-order Canon's new RF 14 to 35mm f4L lens over at www.pixelconnection.com with only 20% of the total cost down. Put 20% down, pay off the rest later. Awesome financing opportunity, guys. It's perfect for anything from landscape to documentary shooting, and this zoom lens is complemented by an advanced optical design that greatly reduces color fringing and distortion for high clarity and maximum sharpness. So, like I said, if this lens interests you, be sure to go visit www.pixelconnection.com and pre-order yours today. Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. I hope you got as much out of it as I did, and I'll be sure to see you in the next one.